Floyd, thank you for being here.
Great to be here.
So, what is UBI and is it necessary?
A guaranteed basic income is an income floor under which no one can fall below. It's a society where we've practically eliminated poverty because no one goes beneath this income that would be set to the poverty level, so that everyone is just above the poverty level. And getting income from work is just simply adds to your income so that people can live good lives. I see it as an evolution of capitalism where we can actually use market forces and improve the way the market works by ensuring everyone can fully participate. Everyone has the means for basic subsistence so they can pursue their potential, pursue the education, pursue the jobs that they want, and not be trapped in poverty. So it's an income floor in real numbers in Canada. Maybe it'd be like $2,000 a month that would gradually taper off as earned income increases. That's called a guaranteed basic income. And so that way you can see it also as an income supplement for people who do work, because 2/3 of people in poverty are working. And that's crazy. We shouldn't have anyone who's working in poverty, but unfortunately, that's how the market works. And so a basic income corrects this problem that's inherent in our economic system and brings everyone a dignified life and opportunity to fully participate and pursue their potential.
And so, how is it going to be administered and who is it going to be administered to? What do we mean by those in poverty and when does it taper off and why?
Okay. Um, yeah, so it would be usually it's discussed about being administered through the tax system, meaning that's why it's sometimes called a negative income tax. So based on the income that you made last year or the income you might project to make this year, you would get a certain amount of the basic income. And although it doesn't have to be through the tax system, it would target all. Generally, it's discussed about targeting all working age adults from like 18 to 64, because currently we already have income support systems for families with children, the Canada Child Benefit, as well as for seniors. There's something called the Guaranteed Income Supplement, which basically is like a basic income that tops up seniors above whatever their pensions are to be at an adequate level for basic living. So we have a basic income for basically for children and for seniors. We don't have it for working age people. So within that group, it would apply to everybody, like anybody. There's no other targeting. It's the whole point of basic income is that, or one of the main advantages is that it's much better than other forms of social assistance, like the welfare system, which is because it removes conditions, it removes all the time that's wasted in the bureaucracy of people needing to get the help that they need. And it also removes the work disincentives that come with the welfare system, which are similar to what people saw during CERB in Canada. Because remember, with CERB, you would lose the whole amount if you started to work. So that created a perverse incentive. But with basic income, you keep it in part when you work. So there's less of a work disincentive. So that's how it would be administered. And basically, if let's say if you're a student and you're trying to finish school, like you're not working, so you'd be able to get the full amount. Let's say it's $2,000 a month, which would help you cover rent and food. So you can actually stay and focus on completing your studies. If you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to start something new, or you need time to develop something, maybe you get the full amount. But if you're working part-time, you get to keep part of the amount. So let's say someone's making $20,000 a year in part-time income. The way a guaranteed basic income usually works is that for every dollar of earned income you make, 50 cents of the benefit is reduced. That's how it slowly tapers off. So if you're making 20,000, then that means $10,000 would be removed from the basic income benefit, and if the basic income is 24, that means you're keeping 14. So it means you got 20,000 from your job plus 14 from the basic income. You're at 34,000, which is an adequate lifestyle for someone who is maybe trying to work on something in life, go through a transition, and can only work part-time, like maybe a single mother, for instance. So that's how it works. That's how it'd be administered. Now, many people have heard about the idea of a universal basic income where everyone gets the same amount. That's not really discussed seriously in Canada. It'd be a much bigger reform. Although you could think of the carbon rebates from the carbon tax as a form of a UBI, because in many provinces in Canada, everyone gets it. So it's a way to kind of compensate people for the cost of pollution and the cost of the carbon tax.
So, how is UBI going to impact Canadian citizens and people who come to Canada maybe or have come to Canada last year and are planning to come to Canada in the near future? Do they automatically get it as soon as they arrive here? Do they have to be a Canadian citizen in order to get it? How is it going to work in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much all existing government support programs already apply for all permanent residents, and generally there are often there are other programs that that people who are not permanent residents can get in a transition phase. So a basic income, it really depends on which political party implements it. I know there's members of NDP who believe that even temporary foreign workers should get it, and like refugees should immediately get it. I think refugees already get some sort of temporary support now. So it really depends on your politics. Maybe conservatives would say it should only be for citizens, but generally, everyone I've spoken to who's in the movement believes it should, at the very least, be for permanent residents. Because it doesn't take that much to become a permanent resident, even though citizenship takes many years longer. Because we don't want to create any sort of underclass or two-tiered society. In a good society, everyone has the same benefits, so that coming to Canada, people know that they're coming to a place that has eliminated poverty, where everyone can pursue their potential.
Yeah, that's very important to note. So thank you for that. One of the cons I've heard about UBI is that it might lead to an economic disruption. Is that plausible in your eyes, or is that based off of a misunderstanding?
I think it's based off misunderstanding. I mean, first of all, an economic disruption might lead us to a UBI, because if shit hits the fan and we have mass unemployment, or what's been happening more actually is that in the last 40 years, all the technology and automation we have, we've been losing middle class jobs, and more people are in lower incomes. Like, as that becomes a crisis level, people will demand some sort of change. I think so. I think economic disruption might actually lead us to basic income, just like the pandemic led us temporarily to experiment with CERB. But taking to the spirit of the concerns, some people think that UPI might cause inflation, or might reduce people's work disincentives, or the tax burden would be too harmful. Well, let's take all those. Inflation. No one's suggesting to print money to make a UBI. It's just recirculation in a progressive tax system, much like we currently have the Canada Child Benefit and all kinds of other benefits. And we never saw inflation with those. It's actually using money more efficiently, because millions of people using it to get above subsistence level will make better decisions for their lives, and spend that money in the economy, than a few wealthy people who have it hoarded in their bank accounts and aren't spending it. So it's actually good for the economy in that regard. And it's been studied. That there was a study by the Canadian Centre of Economics Analysis that showed that a basic income would grow the economy by more than it costs. It would add like $80 billion a year to Canada's GDP eventually, which is, for context, is like the size of our entire tourism and hospitality industry combined. Nearly 500,000 new jobs, because the increased spending makes the market system work better and helps small business, and it all trickles up to economic growth. On the work disincentive, there's really no evidence of that. There have been probably over 100 pilots already around the world in the last 50 years, and there was never really any meaningful disincentive to work that was shown. Some people who worked a few less hours were students and recent mothers. I would argue those are both good things, because students want to complete their education, and why not have longer mat leaves if possible? It's good for maternal, for prenatal development and natal development. So yeah, so some of these economic disruptions on the tax side. Another view is that a basic income is, how it affects the economy really depends on how it's paid for. So you want to choose taxes that won't harm productivity, or won't be disincentives, so for instance, we've on UBIworks.ca, we put out a plan that shows how we can pay for basic income without costing the vast majority of working people, primarily through taxes on the financial sector, on large wealth portfolios, ending certain loopholes for large corporations and wealthy individuals. So I think that would be a very fair way to do it, and it would have a net cost of up to $51 billion, which, for context, is only about 5% of total government expenditures at all levels in Canada. So it's not a lot. And so it can be paid for in a way that would not be economically disruptive.
It feels like UBI has been talked about for so long, and in some cases, it has been tried, but it has failed every time. So, in your opinion, why do you think that if we implement it in Canada in the way that you're describing, that it would be successful now?
Well, where has it failed? I'm not aware of any failures of the basic income.
During my research, it was failed in Brazil, just these countries that are listed: Brazil, Iran, Kenya. So, just on those, Why do you think it would be successful now?
Well, again, I think I'd have to understand how they mean that it failed, because the Bolsa Familia in Brazil actually kept millions of people out of poverty. And I've seen research that showed that it grew the economy by $2 for every dollar it costs. I'm not aware of any distinction in terms of how it failed, except that a deeply right-wing government got elected and maybe they reduced it. But I don't think it failed in terms of what it was intended to do. In Iran, the reason why their basic income was temporarily rolled back, it was never actually instituted as a
Mm.
means of addressing poverty and improving society. It was implemented as a means of actually changing the way fuel subsidies worked. So in Iran, they're subsidizing the cost of fuel, and because they're under heavy sanctions and disruptions from Western sanctions. And they said, well, instead of subsidizing fuel, which basically helps rich people, let's just give everyone some money, especially poor people, and let fuel go to its true market cost. So that way, the most vulnerable in Iran are better off, and then the wealthy are paying their fair share. So that happened, and actually, for a while, it was probably the world's biggest indirect basic income, because it was never meant to be a basic income.
Mm.
It also had amazing results for reducing poverty and for people being healthier and better off. There was no measured decrease in work disincentives, but a lot of the old world culture, people just thought we can't give lazy people money. There was a lot of backlash culturally on it, because society didn't like the fact that people were getting free money, and it slowly got reduced. But that's all political stuff that has nothing to do with the efficacy of the program. And I forgot what other place you mentioned, but it's important to note that there have been many studies and pilots that have shown that it works. Actually, in Kenya, Give Directly has a basic income study there. 12,000 people have been receiving a basic income, and that has worked. Like
Mm.
it has resulted in people lifting themselves out of poverty. The villages that got the basic income had dramatically improvements in their economic productivity. And like I haven't seen any negative stories about Kenya either. The way a lot of opponents to basic income will sometimes point to Finland and say, "Hey, look, it failed," but it didn't actually fail. It just showed neutral results. So in Finland, some people who were on welfare for a long period of time were given 800 euros a month instead of their welfare payments.
Mhm.
So basically, they're giving money that had less conditions on it. Now, 800 euros a month is not really basic income. It's not enough, right? So what they saw after 2 years was that there was basically no change to people's employment status, but there was huge improvements in people's happiness and reductions in people's tension and stress levels. So whether that worked or not depends on your point of view. But some of the people who ran the program said a couple just actually recently that although it wasn't studied as part of the pilots there, they did notice anecdotally a lot of people had better quality jobs by the end of the program than they had before, because they had the means to pursue better work. So we saw that also during the pandemic. Like a lot of people were able to step out of shitty jobs, pursue better jobs, take courses. Some started small businesses. So that supposed labor shortage we had was a lot because people actually pursued better work and changed industries because they temporarily had a bit more job security. So I'm not really aware of any pilots that didn't work. The vast majority show positive benefits.
Well, the three countries that we mentioned are developing, and then the one country that you mentioned where it was neutral is Finland, which is relatively developed.
Yeah.
So, is it just not applicable in the developed world, and is it much better for developing nations, or can it actually be successful in places like Canada and the United States?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it has different benefits in different places, different pros and cons, right? In the developing world, some of the pilots in Kenya and also in India show that people actually work more. Why do they work more? Because if you're in extreme poverty and now you can afford to buy a fishnet or a vehicle, or to buy nice clothes so you can go apply for a job, like people are released from the structural impediments that poverty imposes on them. So we saw that kind of rapid growth. In developed countries, we already have other social assistance programs, but generally, in developed countries, it's about improving health, reducing stress, and having people freed from from abject poverty, from the time constraints and the indignities of that. And some of the recent pilots we saw in the U.S. was in Denver and other places. Even small amounts that they received, like $500 a month, the pilots showed that more people actually got better work jobs during the period of the basic income than the control groups did. Again, because basic financial security led them to have that opportunity to do so. We saw in Manitoba, in Dauphin, Manitoba, that there were 8% less hospitalization visits during the 1970s Minkum pilot that 5,000 people were on. We saw wages at the median wages went up 6.8% during that experiment in that city. Now you might wonder, wait, why would the median wage go up? Because they weren't getting the basic income, right? That's only the people in poverty were. Well, because if lower income people can negotiate better pay and pursue better work, that eventually trickles up so that everyone gets a raise out of it, and that's very good for the economy and for society at large.
I don't remember which book it was. I think it was Homo Deus or 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, both by Yuval Noah Harari. But in
Yeah.
one of those, he detailed UBI and the fact that politicians and political parties may use the concept of UBI to kind of swing people's votes and say, we're going to give you $1,000. Oh no, we're going to give you 1,500. We're going to give you 2,000. So can UBI be used as a kind of political weapon or political incentive to vote for a specific party?
I'm pretty sure Yuval is pro UBI. Maybe he was commenting on a potential, but
Yeah, I don't think there was a certain connotation he had. I think he was
yeah.
just talking about it as a concept or as an issue.
I mean, that is a concern people have. And I mean, I don't think that'll happen because it hasn't already happened for so many other benefits that we have. Like,
Mhm.
look what happens whenever any debate happens about some new benefit, like pharmacare in Canada, or all kinds of things. You have people say no because we're taxed enough already. You have people say yes because of the inherent justice or humanity of it. There's all kinds of counterbalances in politics for that, and I just don't see any evidence that parties would just be competing with each other for how much they can give because the money has to come from somewhere. So,
Right.
so there are political balances in place there. In Canada, the debate is not how much. The debate is there's general consensus that a basic income should be set to the poverty level, the market basket measure, which is different in each province. And I don't know of any proponents for basic income in government or civil society who are suggesting more than that, right? So it's purely about reducing poverty.
Fantastic. And I think this conversation leads to the next one, which is the housing crisis. So
Yeah.
could UBI help with the housing crisis and vice versa, or are these separate issues?
I think you could, and that's actually I mean, when people are in financial precarity, they think, well, we need more money, and so anything that would give people long-term financial security will allow them to pursue better work, increase their wages, afford a home. At the end of the day, like the housing crisis, there's many factors to it, but one of the results of it is that people can't afford rent, they can't afford a home. So what are some of the existing responses? I think Canada has been rolling out something called the housing benefit, which is based on a program that Manitoba had called Rent Assist. Rent Assist was a cash supplement for renters that was unconditional. So it was almost like a basic income. It wasn't high enough to be a basic income. I think it was like $500 or $700 a month, depending on how people qualify. It helped people with rent. So at the end of the day, money will reduce the severity of the problem. Like this, there's a saying that basic income won't solve every problem, but it makes every problem easier to solve. So if people have more money in their pockets, they can afford rent. However, that's not going to stop what's causing housing market to jump up. And I have a lot of opinions about that and how I think solutions like land value tax are essential, but not even part of the public debate right now. But UBI would certainly help reduce the worst instances of homelessness and unaffordability in society due to housing, but it won't stop the reasons that are driving prices up.
So, what other factors are contributing to Canada's housing crisis? We have this Airbnb fiasco, which I think BC is making headlines because something is going on with that. If you could comment on that, great, but if not, we can move on from that.
Sure. I
Um,
mean, that's actually a focus for my next project. So UBI Works
Fantastic.
was something I worked on for the last 5 years, which is basic income, digital activism and advocacy. The new project I'm working on is called Commonwealth Canada, and we're looking at how the value of nature, land, minerals, air should be seen as Commonwealth, something that benefits everybody. And so let's take a look at that. If you look at the housing market, fundamentally, no one's talking about what we actually need, which is prices to come down. Would you agree? They're too high. They should come down.
Mhm.
Yeah, so they're too high, right? So what are politicians talking about? They're just talking about all kinds of programs that might increase supply and such. But even that, what will that do? It'll slow the growth of housing prices. At best, it might flatten them for a few years, but it's already too expensive. People can't afford to buy a home. So we need a solution that will actually bring housing prices down. And so if we look at what's actually driving prices up, it's because the way our market works now, there are two completely incompatible markets in the housing sector. There's the market for people's need to live and rent, and then there's the market for people's desire to create wealth. So housing is treated as a wealth creation vehicle, like stocks or bonds or any other commodity, as opposed to a place to live. That means there's an investor market that is constantly outbidding families. There are incentives in the market to simply buy property and let it stay empty and not even rent it out. There are if families are just willing to pay more because they know that eventually the house of the price will go up and they'll make their money back. So this desire to treat the home as a piggy bank leads the whole market to continue bidding up prices. And that is just not compatible with the need to keep prices low. So let's unpack that a little bit. So the solution, sorry, at the high level, is we need to eliminate the wealth creation incentive from homes, so that homes are actually a place to live. Homes are a business service, potentially a place to offer to rent, but they're not a commodity that one can create long-term wealth from. It's better off doing that by starting a business, by investing in one's education so they make a higher salary, or buying stocks and bonds. So no one's talking about this because it's too radical, right? Like who wants to end the gravy train that everyone's on? The politicians own multiple homes. 70% of Canadian families live in owned homes. So telling them, hey, we got to bring prices down is politically dangerous. But the cost of that is that young people, Generation Z, I should say Gen Z, immigrants, the next generation are screwed, because they're paying more to make the previous generation wealthier, because everyone wants to in on this commodity. So the solution I think we need to do is to accept that homes should not be a commodity that builds wealth. Homes should be a utility, something that you can own, but ultimately it's a place that you use. So how do we do that? Well, we do that by recognizing first that when we talk about housing, there's two parts to it. There's the house, and then there's the land underneath it. That the house generally depreciates in value over time, needs maintenance and upkeep. It's the land that goes up in value. So for the most part, the vast majority of increase in pricing is just the growing value of land that is being driven again by investment sentiment, by speculation sentiment. So if you take land as an investment vehicle, just like any other investment instrument, it has a yield that people expect. It has an expected return. So if you tax the yield from it, then it becomes worth less. So imagine if a bond only pays you 2%, it'll be worth less than a bond that pays you 5%. So similarly, if we implement a land value tax, we can make land worth less because people keep less of the yield of it, and the cost of that tax will force people who are underutilizing land to develop it to its potential. For example, in downtown sectors where there's parking lots or low rises where there really should be skyscrapers, it would be too expensive to hold that land. The incentives would be to build up, create more supply. And then if land was basically worth almost nothing and you had to pay to use it, families would not be willing to overbid it, not be willing to get into huge debts for it. Prices would come down, and then we'd see that immediately. So some of the research I've seen shows that if you taxed 3/4 of the rental value of land, which is roughly like a 4.2% tax on current values of land, or a 17% tax on the values of land after such a reform, land would be worth 75% less. and the average home would be worth 42% less as a result. So when I say 17%, I mean 17% of something that's worth 3/4 less than it was before. That's why I'm saying the 4.2% of today's value versus 17% of after the reform is implemented. And you may ask, well, where does the money come from? It can come from by reducing income taxes. So our research shows that we could have zero tax on the first $88,000 of people's earned income, and that instead we'd be paying tax for using land, and that would go a huge length towards changing how the housing market works to improve pricing and improve dynamics of the market.
So, how do we start implementing this? What does the path to get this established look like? And is this something that, and obviously, I mean, no offense, but is this something that sounds great in theory, but in reality doesn't really work? Or have you thought about extensively how we should, implement this, whether it's in phases or maybe you start with a small group or a small local area first and then build out? So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, the grand vision is a huge tax shift off of income taxes onto land. Now, in reality, in politics, nothing ever moves quite so big like
Right.
that. And this discussion is not even, no one's really even talking about this right now in
Right.
mainstream circles. Um, and then one reason they're not talking about it is because it offends property owners, right? So like everybody wants the game to continue, and everyone thinks they're going to get wealthy off housing. But how it would realistically be implemented is a province would have to choose to start this tax shift slowly. They could start by in increments, like maybe raise the 0% income tax bracket from currently I think it's like 12K, maybe raise it to 20K. So no one pays tax on the first 20,000, and then instead raise the land tax to compensate for that lost revenue of maybe like 1% or 2%. And then see what happens. Like, does it slow down housing growth? Does it reduce housing prices? Do we see more incentives to construct and such? And they can keep doing that over election cycles. Another approach is to choose a specific town and allow that town. Currently in Detroit, they're working towards reducing property tax and instead shifting to land tax for many of the same reasons. And in parts of Pennsylvania, they already have that. It's called split rate taxation. So instead of paying property tax, you have a tax on land and a tax on property. And generally having a tax on land like significantly higher, like maybe 5 times higher than the tax on property, would get the incentives that one would want. But that's not a major reduction in price because property taxes are not a huge factor in home pricing. So really the bigger shift would be if we shift off of income taxes. So, but I could see a number of Canadian cities adopting split rate taxes to try and change the dynamics of the housing market, and that could lead to confidence for a government to push for more. And
Why
so
is no one talking about the land value tax? Is this something that is kind of pushed to the side in the conversation and no one takes it seriously because it's not worth it, or because of something else in your opinion? Because they actually don't want to do it because it could be that controversial but revolutionary.
I think it's controversial. Well, first of all, it hasn't really been. It's an old idea. Like land taxes were very popular in the late 1800s. Canada had a lot of land taxes at the time, like before we had income tax, and they slowly switched over to property taxes instead. But that was a different time. We didn't have a housing price crisis like now. We didn't have income taxes, so they switched over to property tax because it enabled more taxation, more revenue growth. You tax where the money is, and people have properties, then that's where the money is. Today, it's just no one really. It just hasn't been talked about in a long time, and one of the reasons why it was repealed in some places, even in small amounts, is because it does affect property owners. Nobody likes to pay tax for things that they have, and currently, like the government will do backflips to try and explain how they should how we don't want to reduce housing prices because they don't want to offend their voters. So no one's going out there and saying, yeah, we got to reduce housing prices for all the voters, right? Like that's like they should be talking about it, but no one's talking about it. So I think one, it's not really understood. It's not really part of the conversation yet. I hope to change that and make people understand that we need to do this. Two, no one is certainly discussing that we should make homes no longer an investment asset. Like that's very radical, but and politicians just don't have the courage to do that. it's a huge shift. Maybe the crisis has to get a lot worse before we implement that. But I would challenge anyone to suggest what else would actually work.
Sure.
Like we could double housing supply. I think home prices would probably stay stable. They wouldn't go down. Um, I'm just trying to figure out what would actually work and put that on the docket. But yeah, it's difficult to tell property owners they have to lose net worth, even if after such a tax shift, maybe they experience tax relief. Maybe they're paying less overall on land tax than they paid on income tax. But the cost is that everyone's net worth declines during the transition, and that's very radical.
Well, let me put you on the spot by asking, how do you market this to Gen Z? Because it feels like they're going to be the most affected by the housing crisis and the most keen on finding a solution to that crisis. And so, if I am hearing what you're saying and it sounds great, so what do you say to Gen Z, maybe in simpler terms, to kind of get them on board? And then I'll ask you, how do we start this shift?
Yeah, what I say to Gen Z is, well, if you ever want to afford a home,
Mhm.
we need to end the game where everyone's profiting off rising housing prices. So we need to make homes a place to live, not a place to invest. And if we do that, then everyone will be able to afford homes. And it's like, would you vote for a policy that makes homes more affordable, puts more money in your pocket as someone who's entering the workforce, but in exchange, neither you nor anyone else will benefit from rising housing prices that much in the long term. So instead, if you want to make money, invest in the stock market, start a business. Like, would you vote for that? There's a trade-off, right? Like any major change involves trade-offs. So if the answer is yes, well, then that's that. If the answer is no, and we might be waiting for generations until housing prices get cheaper. I mean, isn't it takes 30 years to raise for a down payment, to save up for a down payment now? People are putting off having children to save for a down payment before they buy a house. So it's really like, do you want a solution now, or you want to wait till you're 35 to own a home and start a family? Now, I don't know if that would work for Gen Z. I mean, you're Gen Z. Like, you've heard the potential here. Like, how do you think we should market
Sure.
it?
Sure.
Yeah.
And this, I mean, you brought up something very important, which is we're putting off having kids and we're having to push back the things that our parents did when they were our age. We're going to have to push it back, a decade or a decade and a half or even 2 decades to
Yeah.
just start. And so, again, this is highly, highly important and relevant for our generation. And I think we'll be open to radical solutions. So let's just say that all of Gen Z are on board. How do we start? What do we do to actually implement this? Because you said that nothing is instant in terms of the government, in terms of implementing these types of things. So how do we start this now so we're not actually waiting for a generation?
Yeah, well, that's the focus of our advocacy, and eventually we'll be launching some digital activism campaigns to tell people that this is an option. I think housing groups should know about this option. Parties should know about this option. Most of them don't. I think young people have never really thought about the land versus housing. It's not really in the conversation. So yeah, I mean, how did we do it for UBI? I think we really had made an impact on UBI in Canada. We had a huge social media channels. We had 40,000 people on our email list that joined signing petitions that are emailing the government about UBI. We got to find a way to make this in the public discourse so that people understand the trade-offs involved. And currently, we're really at ground zero for that. And I'm going to do whatever I can to put it on to make it part of the conversation.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure. Um, I mean, this has been great. I just want to ask you, you were a digital nomad for a while, and you said you started a business in multiple countries, China being one of them. So could you just talk a little bit about that?
sure.
Maybe not just for the podcast conversation, but for myself as well. I'm interested in that kind of lifestyle and pathway. So what did you learn from this? How did you make it happen? And would you do it again? Would you recommend it?
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess so. I'm Gen X, but made me say that I've lived like a millennial in
Yeah.
that we were actually I was doing work from home since I was like 20 years old. I've actually never worked in an office outside of my internships in university. So that was back in like, late 90s, right? Like in like 2000, I was already working remote out of my university dorm.
Well,
So yeah, it's so I started, I just went out to conferences and I was networking, trying to find opportunities with startups to try and work with them. And I found a guy who I had the right skills to build something that he wanted in his startup. And he was from the US. So he ran the whole company over Skype at the time because there wasn't Zoom or anything like that. And it was fine. I mean, it was basically equivalent to what we do now. So worked remotely throughout my 20s and 30s. So I thought, well, if I can work remote, why not work anywhere? As long as I'm not disrupting the business. So I worked and worked remotely in South America. I worked remotely in Europe. I was always working North American business hours because I didn't want to disrupt my availability. I even had a phone number that would forward to a Skype ring,
mhm.
so I could pick up the phone. And so people who at the time, a lot of people are still using phone for meetings, they would never know that I wasn't home because it doesn't matter, right? As long as you're fully available. And yeah, that was great. I recommend it. I probably spent like a month, maybe 2 months at a time away. I still liked having a strong home base coming back to my house. And yeah, that was a good lifestyle. Like, why not, right? Experience different places. You can go to lower cost places, for instance, like
Right.
your salary. Anyone who's lucky enough to make a salary and then move to a lower cost place and keep that salary, uh, you can do a lot with that. And I actually benefited from that, even being Canadian, because I was paid by a US company at US rates while I was a
Mhm.
student in Canada. So I already benefited indirectly from, like, you can call it nearshoring between Canadian rates and US rates at the time. So yeah, it was cool. It's perfectly doable now, especially it's easier with the technologies we have and people's expectations. There's even companies now that will take you with other groups that want to work remote and take you to other countries. Like there's a company called Remote Year, I recall, that you can go on 1 month or 3 month or 1 year long work getaways where you're paired with other people who do the same thing, and they choose places for you to live that are already optimized for remote work. And so like a good way to make friends, a good way to travel. Yeah, so that's a lifestyle that's possible. In my business, I had an international view. I think growing in Toronto really helped me with that. There's a lot of diversity, a lot of multiculturalism. So when I started my online news website for software engineers, I know, well, this is, and conferences, like this could work anywhere that there's engineers. So there's engineers in China, there's engineers in Brazil, those are major markets that might need this in their own language. So just did it, just went there and hired people to start translating and doing original content locally. And that worked out. And so I had an international business that had conferences in the UK, in the US, in China and Brazil. And it worked. I mean, people are people. Like, we all kind of want the same things. Employees are employees anywhere, as long as you have a good culture and a solid, well-organized company culture and organizational style. I was actually very happy to find that I could create a company where everyone works from home. So I started my own business then in 2006, and we have people across 11 countries, like 30, a peak to 50 people at one point, and everyone was all over the place. Like I was hiring to afford larger staff by hiring also in developing countries as well as in North America and Europe. And it just worked out. Everyone works from home, and despite being all kinds of different cultures, it doesn't matter when the work you're doing is consistent and everyone knows what we're working towards. And so that's something I was really proud of, and I'm very happy that such a company could be possible with today's technology.
What was your favorite place to live in? Where was it?
Mm. I spent some time in Barcelona. It was cool to work from.
Mm.
Just a cool place to walk around and travel, check out the beach.
Are you a
Also,
Barcelona football fan?
I'm not really a sports guy, but it was cool to see what was going on in the streets during the games.
Yep.
But actually, Spain in particular was a cool place for a North American to work because Spanish culture, people stay up really late. Like dinner doesn't start till like after 8 o'clock anyway. So you could actually have a North American workday, like work till like 8 p.m., for instance, in Spain, and then go out and like no one's missing you because like you're going out with people at the same time that they're going out, or they go out after 10 p.m. So like you can have a North American workday, still live like a Spaniard, go out and party, have a good time, and then sleep in until like 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, and then start your workday at the same time as North America. So there's actually you don't lose anything on either side with that equation. I liked Buenos Aires. It was a very beautiful town. I only spent a few days there though. It's a place I'd like to explore more. It's very cosmopolitan, very very modern. Um, and yeah, so I've worked in Romania, which is my home country, like in the mountains, in Transylvania. That's very very cool. Yeah, parts of London, and yeah, Brazil, because I was going there a lot for business. So I would stay and usually go to in Sao Paulo for a week or go to Rio. There's nice parts of Rio we can work from. Yeah, that's kind of where I've been.
Just a massive bag of experience. That's incredible. That is
Thank you.
very, fascinating. And the fact that you were doing this since you were 20 in the 1990s,
In the
you know,
early 2000s, yeah, I
early
finished my degree
2000s.
in 2001.
Wow.
I started doing that because I was working for a remote business, and
That
was
was the
able to.
year I was born.
Oh yeah, wow.
Yeah. Um, Last question, I guess. We talked about UBI and the housing crisis, and those two things I think are going to impact Gen Z. I wouldn't say the most, but in very significant ways. Um, and it's going to be kind of a daily thing for them, for how they live. So, what advice, maybe not just about UBI and the housing crisis, but in general, from your life experience, what advice do you have for Gen Z in general to maybe get them along in their careers, their aspirations, and just in life?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's probably some of the same things I faced. I mean, I was always reading about what's the next big thing. I was trying to align myself into industries that were growing fast. So, even if you don't have to be a developer to get a job in the software development sector, for instance, or in like tech sectors. So, looking at what's hot right now in like biotech and AI, and there's just so much change happening right now. So if you align yourself with startups or growing companies, or industries that are growing, you're likely to experience a lot of growth yourself. So it really depends on your goals. Like if you want to, focus on financial prosperity, that's the way to do it. Yeah, if you want to focus on just stability, not just stability, that's obviously great. Then that maybe that's not a goal. Then obviously there's the same old advice people always give: is find a large company or work for organizations that have been around for a long time. But unfortunately, Gen Z has to penny pinch a lot more than previous generations did, and that's really unfortunate. So I really hope that something is done about that. But I think right now for Gen Z, it's far easier than it ever was to learn something new. Knowledge is ubiquitous. So make sure you're choosing things to teach yourself that you can actually turn into some sort of stability or benefit long term, if that's the goal in terms of financial security. It's also never been easier to have an idea and take it to market than it is before. So like now you can have ideas, you can scale things, market them very easily. So it's a good time to be a creator, have ideas and pursue them online, like never before. So I think yeah, having the courage to pursue one's dreams and to pursue new ideas that way. It's also a good time to seek investment. So if you think like a startup or you have an idea, there's just a lot of money out there looking for return, and it's not as difficult as one might imagine to have a good idea and then seek investors for it. It's just different. Like we're in a stage of capitalism where there's just a lot of capital chasing opportunities and fewer of them. So anyone who has an idea, I mean, like, I would pursue that. Like, like don't settle for a normal job if you have an idea that you want to pursue that you think could work out, because it's just a time for that. Now I say this, it doesn't mean that we're in an amazing time. In general, there's less work opportunity and lower quality jobs than ever before. Like Canada is the #1 country in the world for university educated people that are in poverty.
Mm,
So I would argue that if you're not an entrepreneur and you don't think about those kinds of things, it's really good to get into trades,
right.
electricians, plumbing, the trades, because if you look at trades jobs cannot really be automated. It's difficult. You never have a robot coming to your house to fix the plumbing, maybe not for another 50 years or more. So currently, like in places like Germany, they're investing a lot. Like I think I heard something like half or more of all post high school people are going to learn trades and the government's investing in that because they know with all the automation that we have now, there just isn't enough work for people that are doing manual labor jobs in factories. The factories are all being automated. So a lot of people that think, and there's also not enough office jobs for everyone either. So the sector that there's a huge need in right now is trades work. It's not easy to find electricians, and when I do find them, they're fucking expensive.
Right.
You know, it's not easier to find landscapers. You know, like, and because I have a house that has gardens, and it's like the guy who does the work here says he can't find people to do the job. It's just very difficult. So people can make multi six figures doing trades work, and it may seem like it's not sexy, but make it sexy. Like start a company that does it in a cool way. You know, it's just it's you can find those jobs even on Upwork, on TaskRabbit. You know, once you gain a skill, you can monetize it and be independent and self-reliant and create your own future, or join a company that does it. So yeah, I would say like don't think that, like, don't avoid trades if you're inclined to being handy, because it can pay really well and a lot better than a lot of office jobs.
What are your thoughts on automation in general?
It's great. We need
Really?
more.
Really?
Um, I mean, okay. I mean, it's I mean, obviously, the automation is making a lot of things cheaper, and that's what it's supposed to do, right? Bring down the cost of living. However, there's a problem: is that you know, it's nice to save time, but for some people, that means saving income too. Like we need to have good jobs. So, I mean, yeah, I'm pro technology. I'm pro a good future. However, I think we need something like a basic income so that technology works for everyone. At the very least, people can pursue their potential for whatever that means for them, pursue better work, because automation has been polarizing the job market. So if you imagine an hourglass, we used to have a large middle, but it's shrinking. And at the top of the hourglass, you have more people joining the ranks of higher income workers. But at the at the bottom of the hourglass, you have more people joining the ranks of low income workers. And we shouldn't have an economy where the share of people in low income jobs is increasing. Like that should be decreasing. More people should getting high income jobs. But that is a factor of all the automation we have. And people, so I want people to understand is this is one thing to understand about job automation. It's not that you're going to lose your job and then be unemployed. It's that you'll be forced into lower income work unless you're a high skilled tech worker or aligned with like those kinds of companies. So for many people, it means lower income work, and it's just simply like a lot of people competing for fewer jobs that are easier to do. So let's imagine for your audience, like what the impact of technology has been on many tasks. Typically, if it replaces skilled labor with unskilled labor, which is paid less. So let's look at the historical example. You may have heard of the Luddites. The Luddites were people that were seamstresses, like creating clothing, creating textiles, very highly skilled, I believe in the 18th century. And they were replaced with the invention of the loom. The loom allowed a lower skilled person to produce like significantly higher quantity of clothing. So what that meant is clothing got cheaper. So more people had cheaper goods and had maybe quality of life from that point of view. It helped economic productivity. But the people who were doing the work, who used to be highly skilled and highly paid, now were forced into subsistence labor because they're competing with less skilled people for lower money. So that's how to understand the fact that technology leads to more productivity, but it can also lead to lower wages because people take lower income jobs. Let's look at a contemporary example. So that people think that Luddites actually sort of hated technology. They didn't hate technology, they hated not being middle class. That's actually what happened. Let's look at a modern example, trucking. Everyone, you know, there's a lot of people say that truck drivers will be automated away. I actually think that if you take the Luddite example into trucking, there'll be more truck drivers after trucking jobs gets automated, but they'll be lower paid because the long haul routes, the intercountry city routes that are very difficult and very draining, those will be all automated because it's very easy to do self-driving on highways. It's not easy to do self-driving on city streets. So in the cities, so because the cost of transportation will decrease because of automated long haul routes, there'll be more transportation, there'll be more goods being exchanged, which means it's good for the economy. However, the truck driving jobs will be in the cities, and in the cities you have a lot of people competing for those jobs. So they'll be paid less because the jobs are a lot easier to do, have more convenient working hours than someone who is driving across the country, not sleeping and like, you know, just being unhealthy or like being subjected to very grueling working situation. So yeah, we may have more trucking jobs, but be lower paid. That's the exact same thing that happened to the Luddites. It's what happened to my father and uncle. My dad was in Ontario's automotive manufacturing sector, which automated rapidly in the 2000s to compete with China. And he saw software being used to do the design work that he used to do that less skilled people could do, and for less pay. And he's like, he's 55. He saved up a few hundred grand. He didn't want to get less money competing with like people in their 20s to do the work he used to do as a highly skilled draftsman. So that's what happens. And so it's the benefits of automation in terms of improving the job market for everyone often don't show up in an industrial revolution. They don't show up for this generation. They might show up for 2 or 3 generations later, as the market has adjusted to all that change. This generation can be screwed because they're forced to compete for fewer quality jobs, and even in a few generations from now, history shows that the benefits don't come automatically. They come because of a labor the labor movement that is demanding better job security and better pay. Right? Like technology doesn't just lead to magically making more money in people's jobs, and you still need people to fight for a 5-day work week. I hope we fight for a 4-day work week soon. We should already have one. So that's the thing to get about automation. So it's really automation paired with basic income would be the most humane and most common sense thing to do as a first step. We need a lot more than that, obviously, but that's a first step. At the minimum, people shouldn't be displaced into poverty or permanent working poverty because of all the technological automation that we have.
If we're being realistic, what is the timeline for all of this to be implemented? If we are going with your view and, your descriptions of everything, I think they're airtight, but, people
Thank
may,
you.
may differ. How long are we waiting for this? Is it a 5-year plan? Is this, when Gen Alpha are 18 years old, then we'll start seeing the inklings of this? How much time are we talking about?
Yeah, well, again, it's this is a political process, right? So
Mm.
for UBI, it's much further ahead. I hope that we get it within 2 election cycles, and because people know what it is now, and like it's all the parties know what it is. Many people in the NDP and Liberals are for it, but the actual party itself, like the leadership, has not done anything about it really. So things take time to kind of trickle through society, and within 2 election cycles, I think we would have experienced the worst of the upcoming downturn, because there's going to be another 2008. I think at the same time,
Can you say more about that? Sorry.
yeah, well, the housing market is going to pop. I mean, everyone, they're saying it's going to pop for 20 years, but I mean, it really has to get to a point where it's going to pop. We're already seeing spending being decreased because as housing prices start to go down, people spend less because they're worried about their net worth. It's possible the next few years there's going to be a market decline, a major recession that follows the decline in housing prices, because we've reached an unsustainable peak. That just can't keep going on. Like the banks are giving 35-year amortizations, even negative amortizations, to avoid a housing crash. That just means that slowly but surely the economy starts to slow because land prices have gone just too high. So some of the economics research I look at suggests that when things get this bad, as housing prices start to slow down, within a year or two, you see general market decline. So it's quite possible that, and meanwhile, at the same time, we have this AI revolution and things are moving fast, and jobs are already being displaced. Like someone who just graduated yesterday as a graphics artist is no longer doing graphics arts work the way they expected. They're working with Midjourney,
Right.
and they're being required to just become prompt engineers. It's crazy. So as self-driving cars, if those become online in the next 4 or 5 years, we're going to see rapid decline in driving drivers. So I think in the next 10 years, we're going to see simultaneously the convergence of huge disruption due to AI. We're going to see recession due to housing prices having gotten too high. And unfortunately, things will get worse before they get better. I think in that time, basic income will come back into the discourse, and maybe we'll have a party that will have the guts to run on it. And I'll certainly do whatever I can to make that happen. There's a saying that the biggest ideas are waiting for in times of crisis, people will grab out the best ideas on the table. Big ideas don't get implemented outside of crises. So in the next crisis, I think basic income will be on the table, and hopefully land value tax will too. But that's maybe a little further off.
This is a scary note to end from a very hopeful and very optimistic conversation. But thank you, Floyd. This was very enlightening, and it's great to know that people like yourself are not only talking about this, but are heavily involved in it and are actually progressing this and making it an actual reality. So it's really great, and it was a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you very much. Yeah.